Great. So this is Roland Brown. I'm an art director at Soul Atlas. We're going to run through a little bit of uh, drawing technique, a little bit of live drawing. The drawing that I will be working on is the one that you see the very rough thumbnail for. The subject matter is specifically for the tabletop role-playing game that's coming out next year. And this is going to be one of the illustrations which depicts a knight of one of the factions in the game's story. So this thumbnail was the result of me talking with Tiago, the art lead, and I'm going to run through building this into the final illustration. So let me switch over. I've done some work already on the final illustration. Uh, I've laid some stuff out. This is now my tightened up pencil drawing here with some references to work on. I've already started putting in that fiery sky. The story is that these two knights are sort of like the elite of their society, and they look very noble and uh, spectacular, but they're essentially kind of cruel, and they like to burn down villages and do stuff like that. So I've already laid in the burning cloudy sky. I did that in the Rebel program, which has a nice emulator for um, watercolors and various real world effects. And I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between Photoshop and Rebel to get the kind of effects that I want. So uh, I'll tell you right now, one of my favorite parts of the Photoshop interface is this window right up here, which is my preview that allows me to see how all of these elements are hanging together at a very tiny scale, so I can make sure that everything is kind of hanging together uh, in a way that makes sense. So the first thing I want to do is come here. I've just sketched out the silhouette of these two knights, and I want the way I've set up this composition is I want them to really shine out in the sunlight. So I'm going to do a very big swath of light hitting these guys first so that they're jumping out from the otherwise dark and fiery background. So it's sort of like a ray of sunlight has come through the clouds and it's hitting them in a very dramatic way. um, and I'm pretty much just going to do that in Photoshop. I'm going to now switch over to Rebel, uh, which just requires me to transfer the art over and do a few adjustments. And then the reason I like to use Rebel is because it allows me to do more kind of textured effects with my brushes. One one complaint I have with Photoshop is it's a design tool, which means that it's an industrial tool, and with Photoshop you tend to get a very industrial texture to your brushes, which is not always what you're looking for uh, in an illustration. Uh, and I will also confess that my background is in industrial design. So the general, most of my career has been spent designing stuff and then making illustrations that explain the design, which often means that there's so much detail in there that you lose the kind of the overall mood of the piece. So a lot of things I struggle with are, I have to paint stuff and then essentially kind of pull information out so that it doesn't look uh, too much like a diagram. So you'll probably notice me several times painting a bunch of stuff and then scribbling it all out again. That's just uh, my default technique for working, which is hardly efficient, but that's the way I ended up uh, working things out.
Roland, this
So
is Lori in New York. So you go between fine arts and the industrial design illustration?
yes, so when I'm doing concept art, I do tend to get a lot more kind of detailed, uh, and I have to sort of train my brain to uh, loosen up and, not be afraid of having like an entire part of the drawing just be solid color. Like I always want to stick detail in there and overly render everything. Uh, and to some extent, I'm cheating a little bit because these every piece, everything in the illustration should be a reflection of its environment. And you can see here that the environment is all this fire and dark clouds and everything. So this metal texture here that I'm working on should theoretically be kind of more having more oranges and browns in it. But my dilemma is that I really need these figures to pop almost like silhouettes, so I've cheated and, I'm making them more blue than brown, and I'll get back to that later. Gradually, what's gonna have to happen is this pencil layer is gonna have to start of disappear because this being a painterly illustration can't really have those holding lines in there. It has to succeed or fail just based on value and silhouette. So, oh, okay, I just made the number one mistake of most people who work in Photoshop, which is I did a whole bunch of painting on the wrong layers. So now I need to erase all that.
I feel the pain.
Yeah.
Roland, Roland, do you you mentioned a moment ago that you have a lot of background in industrial design and that kind of like you can go into more detail with that when you do concept art. I was wondering if you ever have with like concept art that sensation of I should go as deep as the industrial design, like everything would actually need to function, and if you don't hit that, you're like get dissatisfied with it, or if you can like be like, no, it's fine, it's okay, it's just supposed to go to this amount of depth.
Um, it depends. Obviously, if you're designing something like I've designed some airplane interiors, and obviously, if the design doesn't work, then people are going to find their seats very uncomfortable or whatever it is. In gaming, it's a little bit more forgiving because you can design something that looks cool but doesn't work, but eventually it reduces the immersion of the game. Like if a player is using, I don't know, some sort of horse armor that's just completely outlandish, eventually they're gonna break their immersion and just say like that. I know that would never work, so I'm thinking about the design instead of thinking about the game itself. So I'm a big fan of use real world references as much as possible and really think about whether or not it will work. Um, and it depends on the subject matter. Like science fiction games need to be much more technically oriented, but uh, you know, in some fantasy games, if you have like a flying chariot made out of mushrooms, like maybe sometimes that'll make sense, but uh, you just have to remain faithful to the internal logic of the IP.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
No, they're NPCs, so they will be characters that are encountered by the players, and to some extent, I'm not sure exactly how they interact, but well, two purposes. One is they will be characters that the players can interact with, and two is they are setting up the mood for the environment where this whole action takes place. Uh, so yeah, a lot of there are some illustrations in this game that are very specific, like you see a monster coming out of its cave and it looks exactly like this, and you have an illustration of that, and others are more setting up the mood, uh, which I'm a big fan of. Like in role playing games, you want to have the players able to visualize as much as possible.
I just wanted to ask, are other people seeing the drawing live change? I might have a frozen screen.
I don't see a lot of change, to be honest.
Oh,
I don't
really?
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of what I'm doing are pretty small, so maybe it's just because it's too the changes are too small to see. I don't know.
I'm afraid for I don't know if it's just me, but for me, like not much is moving at all, like on the screen.
Yeah, I have a feeling, I don't know if you need to refresh. I can see the smoky, the last major change I saw was the smoky change, and then you highlighting the white, erasing the gray tones
Mhm.
off of the horse. Yeah, there you go. I can see your. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, all right. Yeah. Yeah. I was working on some. I was noodling a little bit. So I'm going from Rebel back into Photoshop now. Uh,
There you go. What can you zoom in on some of the details too? Oh, perfect, perfect. Yeah, now
yeah.
we can see a
Yeah.
lot of change.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Okay. So yeah, and I'm gonna go back now. Like I said, my workflow tends to be putting a lot of detail in and then taking it back out. So I'm gonna come in now and equalize some of these colors so that uh, again you get a sense of dramatic light, and some of these whites are starting to really blow out. Uh, and another thing that I personally like to another principle that I like to adhere to is the idea that using color should not be the only way to draw attention to something. So, if I were to do this just as a black and white image, like take all the color out, it should still hang together. Uh, so I have one layer that takes all the saturation out just so I can always double check to see if I'm if all my values are hanging together the way they should be. And I at this point, oh, my brush is the wrong. Okay, just doing a lot of this back and forth, and I'm trying to stick to just the big details because these kind of illustrations it might take like 4 or 5 days, and obviously I'm not going to subject you to all the tiny, tiny little scrubbings of my brush. I'm trying to remain true to just the large, big gestures. Are you seeing any motion now? I'm doing
Yes, yes.
relatively small. Okay.
It's getting exciting. That's starting to pop. It's really neat to see also the black and white version with the values and then the dynamicness with the color.
Yeah, that's always good exercise. The other good exercise also is to occasionally just flip the whole thing. That helps also. Sometimes the eye gets so familiar with what you're doing that you want to sort of shake things up a little bit and just give yourself another perspective that way. Really, glaring compositional errors come to the forefront and you can correct that.
That's so interesting because we do the exact same thing when we edit a movie,
Hmm.
because you edit it like over and over and over again, and eventually you've seen it like a gazillion times and you completely lose it, like lose that first impression feeling. And you flip it or you make it black and white, and then it's like almost like watching the whole thing for the first time.
Yeah, yeah, and I believe in the Renaissance they would like look at the painting in a mirror to get the same sort of thing of just like seeing it from a different perspective.
Depends.
I apologize if there's some buzzing sounds. They're doing some construction on my building, so there might be a few sounds of saws and things like that.
I thought that was the sound of your cursor.
Oh yeah. And then as things progress, there are times when I start to just use my color picker to pull colors out of the environment, which, you know, some people say that's cheating, but if you have a deadline, my philosophy is use every dirty trick in the book to get the deadline met. So uh, I'm
Why would
now,
that be cheating?
well, just, in traditional media, you would obviously mix every color on your palette from scratch and then put it in. So if you want to match a color, you'd have to be very careful about finding the right pigments. But in Photoshop, you can just use an eyedropper to pick the exact color you want just by clicking your mouse. So some Puritans say, oh, that's, only lowlifes do that, but I don't care.
Okay.
Did you study rendering of reflective and metallic materials? Because the quickness in which you're able to make it look reflective or metallic is amazing.
Oh, yeah, that is one artifact of my career in industrial design, where I have to render materials of, let's say I'm presenting a design of a wooden box with bronze hinges or something. I have to be able to render those materials very quickly and very accurately, and so eventually, uh, over 30 years of doing that, I sort of get a sense of a formula. And again, uh, some people might say, well, you don't want your art to be a formula. It should be fresh every time. But again, if there's a really tight deadline, you got to cut corners as much as possible. So I'm not afraid to use formulas that have worked time and time again.
I feel like one could have a philosophical debate about this because I think in many ways that's the craft part of the art, and I think that ought to have a place there as well if you know how to do something. That's like I don't think it should be like inelegant to use your knowledge about how to do something. Like,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
you know.
yeah. Because I would say really 90% of if you go to an art school is they're just going to teach you all the formulas that work, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, uh, and you know it'll be 20 years before you can produce any good art. But uh, yeah, so I think sort of taking what has worked over the millennia is legitimate, and you can still see that in action. Like if you go to the Louvre, you'll still see art students setting up their easels and copying from the old masters. So, uh, you know, copying is a copying and stealing other people's technique is a time-honored tradition in the commercial arts.
Definitely an interesting topic.
Yeah, and I know we've gone off on a tangent a little bit, but it's always good to talk about art. Yeah. And just in case you're wondering about this strange format, there was some discussion about how this illustration would fit into the final book. So the the book is going to be set up as two A4 pages side by side, and the width of this illustration is one A4 page. So this blank area right here will eventually be covered with more clouds and stuff, and that'll be a place where the editor can place text if they so choose. So uh, the composition looks kind of weird this way, but eventually it'll have a functional reason why it's done that way. So if I fall silent, it's just because 'cause I'm concentrating, but if there's any other questions, just feel free to chime in.
I'm curious. I think I know some of the answer from earlier conversations we've had, but when you work on the figures and gestures, you I gather at reference material, photographs, video, and your
Yeah,
own.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have some of my references here, uh, of horses, armor, fires. My very general principle is I try never to put pencil to paper without having good references, and my my philosophy on that is if you rely on what is in your head, if you're just drawing without references, you're relying on what is in your head, your total memory of the real world, but you're not learning anything new. But when you work from references, you're learning something new about how the world works, and that allows you to grow as an artist. So, sometimes I have to draw things where there are no references, and in that case, I just have to make it up. But uh, for the most part, I try to always have something to refer to. And I feel like right here, uh, this guy is getting a little bit too. See, one thing that happens like around here is there's so much contrast that now it starts to become choppy and flat, and a lot of the rendering of forms gets lost, and it just becomes what I fear most, which is just like a diagram or a flat kind of uh, technical drawing of armor rather than something that conveys a mood. So I have to come in and just sort of equalize some of that out a little bit.
Or the audience view, whether it's on print or on somebody's iPhone or on a larger tablet like you're drawing on a Wacom. Um, Seems like you go in for tight detail as well as it would read well, even as a stamp size.
Yes, yeah, yeah. That's sort of the golden standard that I strive to, which I achieve it sometimes. Sometimes I sort of didn't do so well, but yeah, I definitely want to remember that with these illustrations, and this is probably because of my background in comic book arts. Like I know that a lot of these illustrations are going to be looked at for anywhere from 3 seconds to half a second, so it needs to like slap you in the face right from the get go. Uh, which isn't the only philosophy of drawing this stuff. There are some illustrators and a lot of, like, medieval Chinese illustrators specifically would draw art where the intent was you would sit in front of it and sort of contemplate it for hours. So that's doing something totally different, but in the commercial arts of the West today, you kinda wanna get stuff that can be understood within milliseconds, and then most people will look at something and immediately discard it. I'm probably being a little bit more cynical than I should be. I'm sorry? Yeah. Keeps it real.
World's keeping it real. And obviously, I'm a fan of your work, but one of the things that I love is that you get a quick read, like you're in a millisecond, and immediately I can pick up on what the whole gist is. But what I like is that spending time to actually look at it, there's so many layers of detail that go further and further in that you've considered on the quick read, the medium read, and the long time read going into every brushstroke.
Mhm. Yeah, 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 and what I'm doing here, I still consider a very rough block-in, like, uh, to be to be competitive with most contemporary illustrations, I'm gonna have to go in here and noodle a lot of this stuff, like, you can sort of tell, well, those are armor plates, but if you get too close, there's scarcely more than little scratches and dabbings with my brush, and that all needs to get cleaned up, but that, it's gonna take probably several days to really pull it all together. And then, I'm kinda kinda on the fence about how I want that horse to look, so or what color it should be, so I'm just gonna do that stuff on a separate layer, and if it sucks, then I can just trash that layer, and I will not have wasted a lot of time. I'm kind of gravitating towards white horses because the concept of these knights I'm guessing that the people in this particular part of the world regard these knights as very uh, scary or ominous, so maybe they should be riding around on black horses, but within the strictures of this illustration, they probably will look better on light horses. So I'm just going to go that way unless Jonas has a specific thing that he wants to interject about that. All right, I'm going to go back to Rebel or let me know. Oh, okay. And just let me know, is that coming through okay, or is it that scribble? Okay, all right. Aha, okay. Then let me just stay in Photoshop. Something's something's going on in Rebel. Maybe the drawing engine.
I see the demon in your shadow.
I'll just stay in Photoshop. Okay, great.
My battery went dead on my old MacBook. Haven't replaced it yet. My apologies. Ooh. For the 3 seconds I was gone, this looks amazing. It keeps getting better.
So a lot of times with references, it's sort of an intellectual exercise because the reference might be lit from a direction that's the opposite of what you need. So you have to sort of uh, reverse all the lights and shadows in your head as you're drawing them, which uh, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's always a challenge of drawing these sort of, this speculative subject matter is sometimes references just don't exist. So you really need to rely on your knowledge of the world, and that just comes from experience. And again, looking at lots of references all the time.
And I already know this answer, but I find it curious and interesting. How long has your history been in rendering, drawing this kind of topic? And I'll hint by say I know about Dungeons and Dragons history. I've been privileged to see some of the earliest works of Roland Brown.
Yes, I think some of the earliest illustrations that I've done within the tabletop role-playing gaming industry were done around 1979 or 1982. This was an era when Dungeons and Dragons was far from being the dominant uh, player in the tabletop role-playing gaming industry. So I work pretty hard to make sure nobody can see those drawings that I did when I was 15 because they're god awful. But yeah, I've been doing these kinds of subject matters for a long time. And quick plug, I also did a comic book recently that uses a lot of these kinds of concepts and subjects. So yeah, it's been a while since I've been doing this stuff. And you can see I just used my dropper tool to literally pull colors from the background and drop them into some of these reflected surfaces. And to some extent, you even want to do that uh, with surfaces that are not reflective, like even like that horse's neck. I'm putting some orange in that's a reflection of the fires in the background, because in the real world, light is bouncing around a lot, and as an illustrator, it is helpful to exaggerate that a little bit. Uh, in the camera, with the camera, you don't see that kind of interactivity so much, but um, as an illustrator, you want to get to the essence of what's going on. You don't want to do a photorealistic, or I should say, I don't want to do a photorealistic render. I want to do something that's a little bit more uh, capturing the mood over capturing precision.
Mm. And actually, you might have already mentioned this, but the background, was that actual watercolor on watercolor paper?
No, that was Rebel, so that's all digital.
Wow. So I did hear you mention that it's Rebel, but even I couldn't tell because it looks so authentically like Sumi paint and watercolor wash. That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good software. I mean, I really cut my teeth as an artist working just in traditional media, specifically in watercolor. So if I could just do what I wanted all the time, I would be doing these all as actual watercolor paintings on paper. But the reality of the commercial arts is I just don't have the luxury of those kinds of time frames because doing fine art watercolor painting is very labor intensive.
Less margin for error.
Yes, yeah, that's sort of one thing about watercolor is you're you kind of become an adrenaline junkie because every stroke that goes down, you can never take it back. So you better get it just right every time, and it becomes more like a performance. It's like, I was a dancer for many years, and to some extent, painting is like a performance in that you can't take it back, and you have to like if you don't concentrate 100% on every stroke that's going down on the paper, then you're going to ruin it, and that sort of high risk environment is it can be a rush.
And you go back and forth between your Wacom on your PC and your iPad and actual paper, pencil, watercolor.
The bulk of my work is on the Wacom Cintiq tablet on my desktop, uh, and I've been doing more work now in Procreate on the iPad, uh, which doesn't give me as robust of a tool set, but it's handy for if I'm not at my desk. Uh, but gradually, like the only software that I use, let's say for this, are Rebel and Photoshop. And to be honest, I am in the process of weaning myself off of Photoshop just because I feel that, okay, little political tangent. I feel that Adobe's business practices are very exploitative, so I try not to use their products whenever possible.
Mm. The membership.
Yeah, it's just sort of I'm maybe it's just because 'cause I'm an old fogey, but I wanna buy software and then I own it. I don't wanna rent it.
I'm old fogey too.
Yeah,
Now you
and
did
so
sculpture. Oh, sorry.
oh, no, I was just gonna say, um, you can see I'm gradually, this pencil layer is where I started, but as I'm doing the drawing, that pencil layer is becoming, uh, very faint because eventually it has to go away. Unlike comic book art, you don't want that holding line. You just want purely values to explain your forms. Uh, so that means I need to be mindful of my edges. And one nice thing about digital media is you just turn on you make sure that you can't draw outside the lines. So if I do this, then it goes everywhere. But if I turn on my layer opacity, then it only draws wherever that layer is. Uh, so that is the easiest way to make sure that your layers are crisp. If you want them crisp, if you don't want them crisp, you have to do something else.
Mm.
And yeah, a lot of this is edge control. Like some of these edges, uh, you don't really know where one edge ends and the other begins, which creates more mood. And then when you have very high contrast edges, like some of these armor plates, then uh, that that calls attention to itself a lot. So you're sort of choreographing where the eye lands and where it doesn't. I don't know if these headdresses are supposed to be red, but I'll make them red for now. I can always change them later. And also, like, sometimes people ask me about my brushes in Photoshop. Like, some people think, well, if I get just the right custom brush, I'll be able to paint like the masters. But the truth is, I pretty much use the default brush set that ships with the program. And like right now, that's just a dot. Uh, and it's really about the principles that you can draw upon that are going to guide how well the thing comes out.
Interesting fact, if this influences anything, the plumes on the head on the armour helmets would have been used for identification of your fellow soldiers.
Yeah, I'd imagine functionally that's what they were originally.
That's amazing. So each plume would be separate so that you could identify the individual as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, there would have been different patterns and different colours based on um, which parts of the army were in it. It's dated back to the Romans, who used it for identification from their helmets so that they could identify the centurions.
Wow.
And I believe I read somewhere that the 18th century British soldiers wore the red uniforms specifically so that they could be seen within the clouds of cannon fire smoke and could be identified, but that might be apocryphal.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Like Hunter's Orange.
Yeah,
right, yeah.
I'm pretty sure that one was true because I think that's why the French used blue and the Prussian army used that black and gold pattern for their liveries.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember going hiking sometimes during hunting season. You gotta wear all orange clothing so that you don't get shot.
So that's why you like the color orange.
Yeah, it's a survival thing.
I was going to ask you if your sculpting background plays into your rendering because you have your objects look very sculpted as you go
Hmm.
along in the painting process.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, a little bit, and that can get me in trouble because I want to render everything as rounded, or I want to indicate the dimension of everything when sometimes in an illustration you need to worry more about silhouette, and sometimes things look better uh, if they're just rendered flat, and the human perceptual organ sort of understands that it's dimensional, but you don't need to get so technical about it. Uh, and I would say, like, really, uh, most illustration is an exercise in tricking the human perceptual mechanism, where the eye is trained to take in great information and then edit out the stuff that the brain doesn't care about. So being able to manipulate that information makes an illustration a lot easier to perceive. Where pretty much if you put too much detail in there, it makes it more confusing, at least in the style that I like to work in.
So there's a point where you render what you feel needs to be rendered and then you pull back and see what information can be edited out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there are some times where I'll duplicate the layer and just do a big blanket adjustment of everything that I've been doing. Um, so, like, I don't know if it'll be the right effects that I want, but let's say I could like change some of these settings just to see, maybe I want to beef things up a little bit, or maybe that's just too garish and I'll forget about it. But that's the nice thing about Photoshop is you can put information down and then uh, manipulate it a lot.
Was that a filter you just ran it through or options?
Oh, that was changing the blend mode of layers, which
Um,
um, so if I go up here, I can do all sorts of things
oh,
that
oh,
don't make any sense. But sometimes there are some settings that, like, I use like the soft light setting a lot to it very slightly beefs up the contrast of the whole image, and it very slightly burns out these very subtle light colors, which sometimes is like a lighting style that you want, and then other times, like here, I would feel it looks a little bit too uh, garish, so I'm not going to do that. And one of my favorite Photoshop brushes is this sort of chalk brush, which gives me uh, a nice, soft, but yet not too soft effect. Still feeling like this area right here is cutting my horse figure in half, and I want to mellow that out a little bit. That's what I was talking about earlier, where I get so caught up in the details that it just sort of breaks apart the overall uh, presence of the figure, and you start looking at buckles and fingertips and stuff, and you lose the mood of the overall picture. I think it's time to flip this again. I'm getting a little stuck in noodling details. A good idea also is to jump around a lot, so it would be easy for me to just keep getting this helmet just right, but maybe this figure over here needs a little love, and I need to take a break from getting obsessed about one thing.
Other than a timeline deadline, how do you know when you're done?
Uh, Yeah, that's I can't say I've really solved that so well. I tend to err on the side of saying it's done when really it should take more work, uh, which is, I guess, a better place to be than being of the mentality I'm just going to work this thing to death for the next 10 years. Uh, but yeah, the the worst thing you can do in any piece of art, whether it's commercial or fine art, is to overwork it. And unfortunately, the rise of Photoshop as as an artistic medium has facilitated a lot of overworked art because you can take this big brown patch I have here, and then you can photo bash like some sort of texture in there, and then you can copy and paste some other very detailed things, and then maybe I want this sword scabbard to have all sorts of golden brocade on it. I can photo bash something like that in there, and it's very easy to make things look muddy and overworked. And some people don't mind it, but again, I'm old school. I try to keep everything very gestural and very much about the mood rather than noodling it to death.
Like using tools that we have just for the sake of we have them, so use them, versus kind of your description of restraining or doing the minimal amount and step back.
Yeah, that's what works for me. And there are other artists who take that even further, where I'm thinking of like Nathan Fowkes, who tries to get the entire thing with one stroke, like plan out that perfect stroke and let it sell the whole piece, which is also kind of similar to watercolor. Watercolor is the medium where it's the most easy to overwork it because if you keep going over the same area, it eventually gets muddy and lifeless. Uh, so in watercolor, you're always striving to get all your information just with one perfect stroke. And I definitely like that philosophy on painting. It's very demanding. And here I've gone too crazy with trying to over render this, so I gotta pull a lot of information out of it again. And right now I'm using just a default round brush that's very transparent. Uh, and it's a good way of putting something in, but it's not too dominant. If I were to use a brush that is very opaque, you're going to get this sort of high contrast stuff that you see here. And this kind of contrast really sucks in the eye and makes that object like scream for attention. And that's not always what I want. Again, it's a question of manipulating what the viewer sees. Time for another blast of light. I have my brush set to the color dodge blend mode, which just blows out all my lights and can easily be overused if you're not careful, but sometimes overusing it is what you want. Right. So at this point, I feel pretty good about how I've laid in my uh, basic blocks of mass and color, uh, and it'll be a question now of doing a little bit more fine tuning because you can see, at 100%, you can see some of these lines are still pretty rough and scribbly, and I'm going to have to come in and just clean up a little bit. And to some extent, like some of these more brushy textures on the metal, I don't mind it being that gestural. Like there's some people like, let's say, Brad Rigney, who's known for almost photorealistic renderings, which is certainly a stylistic choice, but I really like uh, a lot of texture and a lot of gesture in my art because it conveys a human scale. Like people have been looking at art that was created by a hand for, I don't know, 10,000 years. Like painting art has been the norm, and we're accustomed to seeing those kinds of textures and those types of gestures, and the eye can really recognize a bold gesture and a confident gesture almost immediately, whereas over rendering things to the point where they look like computer renderings, that's relatively new in human evolution, and it's just a different look. It's not the wrong look. It's just a different look. Uh, so one thing I've discovered in industrial design is presenting things to clients. Boy, even if they're bankers, they can tell a stroke of confidence from a hesitating stroke from across the room. So having even an untrained eye knows confidence from timidity, and having these kinds of bold gestures goes a long way to sell the piece.
It's amazing the depth it's gained over the last hour or so since you really since you started really going at it. It's fantastic.
Oh, good. Good. I'm glad that's coming through. And yeah, if you see no activity, sometimes it's me just sitting there staring at the thing. Uh, I've heard some like traditional artists describe where they like there's a channel worn into the carpet in their studio where they just paint at their canvas and then walk back 2 meters and stare at it and walk forward and just wear their carpet out from walking back and forth. And I think that's an interesting thing to note that just taking a step back every once in a while and sort of getting out of the trenches and seeing if it's really working is a valuable thing to do. And it's a little hard to see here, but metal obviously is going to reflect its environment very noticeably. But even non-metallic surfaces will reflect their environment. Like right now, I'm working on this leather, which is, a burnished leather, but it's still gonna catch some of that blue from the sky. Uh, and it's important to keep track of those kinds of things, uh, because the more you can mimic how light operates in the world, the more convincing the illustration becomes, and the more you can exaggerate the way that light works in the world, then the more the read of the object becomes instantaneous.
It's nice how it looks like the figure is still popping out in front of the background, but what you're just doing now makes it feel like it's still integrated or immersed in the atmosphere.
Right. Yeah. 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 And yeah, another thing where I was just saying that all objects in an environment interact with the color balance and the light of everything else in the environment. Uh, if you take like a piece of metal and stare at it, the first thing you'll say is, "Oh, it's gray. If I want to draw metal, I'll just make everything gray." But what I'm trying to do very methodically here is that there's no piece of metal that's gray. It's all browns and blues and oranges, and uh, that really no object in the entire scene should be a flat color. It's always a cluster of colors, and some of them don't make sense. Like there are some artists who are much better at it than me, where uh, where you're just getting tons of colors in every object that you would never expect in a million years. Like Egon Schiele was particularly good at that. He was a Viennese artist in the early 20th century, where he would draw human figures that are like blue and green and purple, and yet you look at it and say, "Oh yeah, that's human skin," even though your brain is saying, "No, that's all wrong." So I definitely try to throw as much color in there as possible, as long as your values are right. Like as long as your values are telling the correct story, then it almost doesn't matter what kind of color is in there. It's still going to read properly. All right. So I'm sort of contemplating, like, do I push that figure in the background even further back, or do I leave it the way it is? I'm probably going to play around with a few experiments. Most of them will be failures, but I just want to see if um, I can't create a little atmospheric perspective. Um, General rule is there can never be enough atmospheric perspective, at least when it comes to uh, concept art and commercial art. Um, so I'm going to put in a layer mask, and then gradually paint in. You can see that fog went away completely. And now I'm going to add it back in so that the front figure is very prominent. The back figure starts to disappear a little bit, which would happen if you're at the outskirts of a fire and there's all sorts of haze and smoke in the ground. So uh, just another dirty trick for creating some more depth in the image. For now, I'm going to turn that layer mask off because I want to keep fine tuning some of this stuff. And I believe that this faction of the Honordom Knights are all about like radiant light and sunlight motifs and stuff, which is why he has that spiked mace rather than like a spear or a sword or something like that.
So a lot of this is historic reference and some of it's creative license or invention.
Ideally, there's as little creative license as possible because in this project, it's very important that the concepts and the designs are consistent and conform to a well-established internal system of logic. So, uh, I'm working with tons of reference material before this rough sketch was even drawn. There were already references being gathered uh, in terms of the design of their armor, or in terms of like that they would carry a mace rather than a banner. Uh, but as a designer, I think one thing personally that is exciting is that you can do a mood board and do a concept sketch and whatnot, but then in the process of executing the art, there's all sorts of other little gaps that get filled in, and those contribute to the design. Those contribute details that had never been thought of before, and so the design process is this ongoing dialogue of uh, try to figure out all the principles. Then you find, well, there were some principles that weren't addressed, so now we're gonna make something up on the fly, and then what we made up on the fly gets incorporated into the design Bible, and you go back and forth. Like, to me, that's a lot more fun. That's sort of how things happened when I was in the commercial arts, where you design, like, let's say, a cosmetics display, and then the engineers would say, like, well, you can't do that. Here's some other choices. And a lot of times the other choices they gave you were better than what you came up with yourself. So that that makes it a fun process.
And then in the video game world, same, only you're less constrained by reality.
Yes, or you're very much constrained in the gaming world. You're very much constrained by the reality that you've chosen for yourself. So, like, uh, Soul Atlas is about being like being very much like historical medieval technology, but then just 80% of it kind of deviates, where there's just some things like a magical element that is lighter than air, so you can, you know, build primitive airplane-like things, uh, but it's very tightly constrained. So uh, that's what's going on in Soul Atlas. But then there are other authors like Michael Moorcock, let's say, who's created worlds where people build entire buildings just by singing songs, and all of the stones magically levitate to where they're supposed to be. So that would be a very different system of logic. And yeah, designing for the real world, obviously physics is always going to be what you have to work towards. But then in some of these gaming environments, you can come up with a different set of principles, and that's always a lot more fun. Yeah, I wish I could do more of this stuff in Rebel, because I'm feeling my textures are a little flat here. But if there's screen share problems, I'll just stick to Photoshop.
I love
And
how painterly it is.
oh yeah, yeah, I try to keep that uh, at the forefront. Uh, yeah, that's always a challenge. That also kind of goes the opposite of my experience as an industrial designer. That if you zoom in closely enough, things become just like a bunch of blobs. Uh, an artist who's a master at that is Craig Mullins, where you swear it's a photograph and you zoom in and it's just like scribbles, and I really like those kinds of gestural exercises.
If I squint my eyes, it looks like it's a photograph.
Mm-hmm. Good, then I'm doing my job. And then again, like, this haze is an experiment. I'll add a few more experiments which I can just uh, explore some other thoughts. Gonna add just a little bit of like uh, blowout, as if this is being seen through a camera lens at the wrong aperture, and it's just everything's getting a little bit blown out. Might be another thing to address when the detailing is a little further along.
That blowout screen really looks beautiful. Like it looks cinematography-ish.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah. Like I said at the beginning, I wanted this to be sort of like ominous, stormy skies, and there's just like this one ray of sunshine that is casting right on these two figures, uh, just to sort of increase the drama. Yeah, I'm still not crazy about this neck armor here. I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to solve it, but I'll just try some different stuff.
It's interesting to watch this in real time. It's sort of like that um, exercise in school where they tell you to write down the directions to tie a shoelace, and then you give it to someone else and they have to follow the directions. You never know
Mm,
how much goes into it. There's so
yeah,
many different things you're describing.
yeah, 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 and it's interesting, Lori remembers this, where we went back to doing a mural, painting a mural on a wall, and, all of these sort of, uh, options of turning things on and off were not there. Like, you mix the color, you put it on the wall, and it damn well better be, like, the exact right color the first time. So, uh, it's interesting how techniques have evolved over the years, 'cause, I definitely cut my teeth, um, basically before computers existed.
Yeah, I'm smiling because we didn't have a backup on the mural. We couldn't just do erase, erase.
Yeah, alright. So, like I said, I'm gonna need to wrap up pretty soon because I have another commitment coming up, but, I'll just sort of do a few more tweaks here and there. This area right here doesn't feel right to me yet, so I'm gonna have to kind of noodle that for a little bit longer. Okay. Yeah, and when I say, I'm not happy with something, I gotta noodle it for a while. Sometimes I have to redraw that same area like 5 times before I feel right, so I think that's a part of the drawing process that should be accounted for. I remember going to the Louvre and looking at some of the paintings of Rembrandt, who was, the greatest master of his time, and I looked at the side of the painting, and it must have been, like, almost a centimeter thick with oil paint, like, he had painted over his mistakes so many times that it was like this big crust of layer and layer and layer of retouching. So that made me feel good, like, oh well, if one of the greatest masters of all time makes so many mistakes or changes his mind so many times, then that's just a normal part of creating art, and it made me a lot more comfortable about, saying, oh, that failed, okay, I'll try it again and just keep going.
I think that's what's so great about watching another artist work is you see how important the process is to get to the final product.
Yeah, yeah. yeah, this is still pretty far from the final product, but I'm trying to be very vigilant about keeping all of the color and value balances working, even if the details will change and evolve. Oh, good, good. I'm glad to hear that.
I agree.
All right. So I do have to sign off in about 5 minutes, but I just wanted to know if there were any other questions or observations that anyone wanted to chime in with, and then I'll have to run off.
I was point said in the Twitch chat earlier. I think I'm getting big Frank Frazetta vibes from a lot of the design in it that I'm really enjoying seeing.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, yeah. Frank Frazetta, I would think, is one of the great commercial artists of the 20th century. Uh, not because he was technically perfect, but because he could sort of punch you in the face with this narrative and this story that was happening, and you get it instantly. And I definitely use Frazetta's principles as much as I can. And one other thing is Frazetta copied the old masters a lot. He didn't just sort of come out of the blue and start painting. He referred to a lot of other greats in the past to get his principles down.
So let's a quick roundup of the chat. Don't think there's nothing else really coming through at the moment. So it's
Okay.
Yourself, it's been a pleasure having you on. Certainly, it's been wonderful to watch.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad.
And thank you, Laurie, for keeping up the conversation as well on it.
I know Roland's work well, but every time I watch him draw, I'm like mesmerized. So this has been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Great.
it's been fantastic. So it's been lovely having the pair of you on, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you. So.
Lovely meeting you two as well. So we will jump off and let you two get on with your evening.